This is From Both Sides, a spontaneous, free-flowing conversation featuring a dynamic team of women, providing insights into both political and civic events affecting the lives of women throughout Pennsylvania. And now, here's your host.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of From Both Sides. I'm Michelle Soletto, your host. Today we'll be discussing one of the hottest issues in Pennsylvania politics, gerrymandering, a practice intended to establish a political advantage for a particular party or group by manipulating district election boundaries. Recently, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court found that the Pennsylvania Congressional Districts are unconstitutionally drawn to discriminate against Democrats and have ordered the Republican-led legislature to draw new maps. But Republican leaders filed an emergency appeal with the United States Supreme Court to block the Pennsylvania ruling. What's next, and what are the implications for our 2018 elections? Joining me today to discuss this timely and critically important issue are representatives of Fair District PA and the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I'll introduce my guests, starting with Dr. Carol Cunningham, co-founder and chair of Fair Districts PA, a nonpartisan, all-volunteer organization working on redistricting reform in Pennsylvania. Vice President of the Government and Social Policy with the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania, PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, working over a decade as a youth pastor, living in Exton with your husband Whitney. Welcome, Carol. Thank you for being here. I'd also like to introduce Suzanne Almeida. Suzanne is the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania. She received her BA from George Fox University and her law degree from Temple. Prior to working for the League, she was the Program Director of Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts. And your work at the League includes a whole range of advocacy issues on policy. So welcome to you, Suzanne. Thanks for being here. Because this is a very exciting time for you both with what's going on in terms of the court systems and gerrymandering in Pennsylvania. So I'm really glad you took the time to be here with us from both sides. I always like to start out by having our viewers understand kind of what your individual journeys have been, how you got involved in this, how this all began. So, you know, if each of you could share a little bit about how this all got started and your roles.
Sure. So the League has been involved in working on issues of democracy, including gerrymandering, for over 25 years. It's the kind of wonky policy issues that our members really like. And we're so excited that it has kind of caught the imagination of Pennsylvanians, and in great part due to the hard work of Fair Districts PA.
So I got involved in this. I was a youth pastor, as you mentioned, and I was not interested in politics at all. But in the course of my work as a youth pastor, my church had a partnership with a church in inner city Philadelphia. So my church was a fairly affluent suburban church, worked with a very needy population in a very poor part of the city. And I got to know the kids from both. We had a lot of conversations about schools because that's what kids talk about, is schools. Mm-hmm. And what I realized was we had kids who went to schools with indoor pools, all sorts of great equipment, field trips to Europe. And then there were kids who went to school who had no auditorium, who had no library.
Maybe who had no lunch.
Who had, well, they had free lunches when school was in session. When school was in session, they had no lunch. Mm-hmm. But I began to wonder about the inequities there. Mm-hmm. I began to wonder, why is it that we can have a school 45 minutes away that has what I would consider completely suboptimal experiences for kids, and those are the kids who need the most, whereas the kids who start with, you know, great privilege and great opportunity are given more and more and more opportunity and more privilege. So when I left youth ministry, I just wanted to understand that, and I was looking around to see who understands these things, and I discovered the League of Women Voters, because that's the group of people who really digs in and tries to understand issues. And the more I dug into the issues with the people in the League, the more I realized a lot of this traces back to our state legislature, which determines the budget for how the schools are run. And I began to try to understand why. I just kept seeing more and more things that were puzzling to me. I was trying to understand them, and they kept leading back in the same direction, a very unresponsive legislative system, and not much choice when we go to vote. And that led me to looking at electoral reform. We created an electoral reform position on the league board. I took that position, and that led me into looking at gerrymandering, and that led to the formation of Fair Districts PA in 2016, January 2016. We created a coalition of organizations to look at gerrymandering together.
And so how does the league work with, so Fair Districts PA is a subcomponent of the league?
So Fair Districts PA is a coalition of organizations led by Carol and an army of volunteers. The league is in charge essentially of, we do the bookkeeping, we do the administration.
Management.
We do a lot of the boring stuff, and we have a voice in the policy discussions and the strategy discussions, particularly as it relates to partnerships and working with other organizations and making sure that everyone is having the same conversation. Because
but you felt that beginning Fair Districts PA was a part of the mission of the League of Women Voters.
Absolutely. It's so central. Working on redistricting and figuring out how to fix kind of the foundations of our democracy is so central to what the league does and how the league works. And it has really taken off in a way that is phenomenal and so exciting and completely unexpected, because districting is generally super boring and wonky, and people don't see how those dots connect.
Well, knowing where things are today, I was shocked to learn that Fair Districts PA began in 2016, so you've only been in existence for 2 years. So that's kind of amazing what you've accomplished. So
January 2016, we had a meeting in Harrisburg. We had Common Cause PA folks. We had Committee of 70 folks. Pennsylvania Council of Churches hosted it for us. And a couple of other good government organizations gathered and said, nobody is thinking about this, nobody cares about this, but we need to agree on some unifying principles, and we need to build a visible entity, put a website together, put a Facebook page out. And for the first year, we had 4 volunteers. I'm a volunteer. I'm like a 70-hour-a-week volunteer at this point. It's kind of out of control. But we had about four volunteers for the first year. And then coming up to the 2016 election, from every side, people just kind of were looking at the way our electoral system works, the incredible lack of choice coming into those legislative races. Half of our races had no opposition. And people were looking at that and saying, there's something weird here. And we just started getting emails, even before the 2016 election, from people saying, we're trying to understand why it feels like something's broken and looking for a way to help fix it. And we want a nonpartisan solution. So we've got hundreds and hundreds, we've got a email list of 4,000 volunteers, but we've got a whole lot of volunteers who put in almost full time on this because they're passionate about making the state thrive for everybody and making democracy work for everybody. We are as nonpartisan as you can be. We have people across the political spectrum and across, it's really wonderful. We have people from, I was a youth pastor, so I love working with people in their teens, and we've got people, the older league folks in their 80s who've been working on this for decades, all working together.
Yeah,
it's really,
and I really
wonderful.
applaud you to bringing all these folks together, because I think that's some of your power. Well, let's get into the details a little bit. Tell our viewers a little bit about what is gerrymandering. I know I gave an overall definition, but tell us what it is and how you see it play out in Pennsylvania, whoever would like to.
Well, gerrymandering is the manipulation of district maps for personal or partisan advantage. So we have districts that were drawn explicitly for specific incumbent candidates, and party leaders who will say, oh, we drew that district for that person. As a voter, I find that incredibly offensive. And so if you look at District 7, which is the one that everybody always talks about, District 7 is any list of the 5 worst gerrymandered districts in the country. District 7 will be there, and it was affectionately named Goofy Kicking Donald at one point, although there are people who call it Bullwinkle.
I like Bullwinkle, I have to say.
Then one of our prime sponsors calls it Spin Art, when you just drop. To me, I like the Spin Art one. But if you look at District 7, you say, what were they thinking? Well, what they were thinking is hand drawing a map for the particular congressperson who's there, but also there's another piece to it. There's another really important piece to it, which is take a community like Montgomery County, the 3rd largest county in the state. If it was drawn as primarily, one district and a little bit more, it's an incredibly swing region. It's a region where any candidate there would have to really appeal to every voter if they wanted to win. They'd have to be a centrist, they'd have to be a problem solver, and they'd have to appeal to all of the voters. If you draw those districts right, you can completely shut out any competition.
But for our viewers to understand District 7, how many counties does that cover? How many different counties in District 7?
So if you look at District 7 with the districts around it, what you'll see is District 7 goes through 5 counties.
5 different counties.
I'm in District 6, right next door. That goes through, I believe, 4 counties. And then District 16, right next to that, goes through 3 counties. But if you look at District 16, it goes through horse country, it goes through Amish farmland, and then it goes up into Reading and captures Reading, the county seat of Berks County, and draws that into District 16. So it takes what would be a Democratic stronghold, a very minority, very poor population, and puts it with a community that has nothing in common with it, just simply to capture votes. And this is we are a nonpartisan organization, but you look at the numbers, Pennsylvania is slightly more Democratic than Republican. We ought to have about 9 and 9. We have 18 congressional seats. We ought to have about 9 and 9. And instead we have 13 Republican seats and 5 Democratic. And that was intentional. It was intentional to do that.
But if you just looked at the registration numbers, that certainly doesn't make any sense. So that wouldn't play out that way typically if the districts were drawn in a more fair and equitable manner.
Yeah, so it's done intentionally. In 1990, the first time the League got involved in this, in 1991, the Democrats did the best gerrymander in the country. So in 2001, the Republicans said, oh yeah? And they did an even better gerrymander. And then in 2010, Karl Rove, looking at Pennsylvania, in the Wall Street Journal said, he who controls redistricting can control Congress. And they began something called Red Map 2010, which took Republican money to go into swing states and do what had been done in Pennsylvania the previous 2 decades.
So we were the model for
We have been
behavior.
the model.
Yes.
And if you look at any of the websites that discuss that, the Red Map 2010 website, the Karl Rove article in Wall Street Journal, the first sentence is, in Pennsylvania. We have been the model for this, and it's been so harmful to democracy here in our state.
So for the viewers and the voters to understand this fully, the results of gerrymandering are not only that the districts don't really match up in terms of representation in pieces of districts, but what are some of the other results of gerrymandering?
So it's not just about the shape of the districts, right? That's the easiest thing to see. That's the thing that feels in your gut that something's off. But it's really about representation and about being able to have communities of interest together so that a single representative can effectively represent the views of the people in their communities. I think that what Carol was saying about Reading is really notable. Reading gets limited funding. Reading gets limited attention because they are looped in with these other communities with whom they have nothing in common. And that's, even the best intentioned representative having to represent fully 3 different constituencies, at least.
Very different.
3 very different constituencies. Would struggle to do that.
And doesn't it also result in less people running? Because I work some political campaigns myself, and I've had some young people call me being interested in running a particular seat, and I look at the data and then say, well, it's districted for a Republican, it's really not districted for a Democrat. And they say, what does that mean?
Right. Yes.
So doesn't it actually curtail the number of candidates that end up running?
And it makes it more difficult for good candidates to win, and it makes it more of an establishment, quote unquote, establishment function through elections rather than individuals who have the desire and the qualities and the qualifications to run for office really being able to throw their hat in the ring. And that's a problem not just for the candidates. It is a problem for the candidates, but it's more a problem for the voters because this is going to limit the amount of choice that a voter has. There's no right to be represented by the person you want, right? You can lose an election, but there is a right to have your vote count and be impactful. And the way the districts are drawn right now, that just doesn't happen.
Well, the other thing I found that it limits candidates too from the perspective that they can't possibly come up with the kind of money that would be needed to run that race. So those are all results of gerrymandering and why this doesn't feel right and doesn't feel equitable and certainly transparent to the voters.
Right.
So at this point, I think we're going to take a break and hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back to talk more about gerrymandering and the impact on our 2018 elections.
From Both Sides is a production of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy and is made possible by the support of Saul Ewing, Arnstein & Lair, LLP, a law firm with a 100-year-old tradition of serving the needs of business, government, education, healthcare, technology, and manufacturing in our region. And by Fair Districts, Pennsylvania, a nonpartisan, citizen-led statewide coalition working to create a process for redistricting that is transparent, impartial, and fair.
Welcome back to From Both Sides. We're here today with representatives of Fair Districts, PA, and the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania, talking about gerrymandering, the process, the impact on the 2018 election. So Carol and Suzanne, welcome back. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of redistricting, how often it happens, how it occurs, just so we have that frame?
So every 10 years there's a national census, and because of the national census, seats are reapportioned among congressional districts are reapportioned among the states. So they have to be redivided among states, and that forces a redistricting of those districts within the states where they've lost seats or gained seats. Pennsylvania has been losing seats for decades. We'll definitely lose a seat in the next census again. So we have to be redistricted at the congressional level, but population's also moving around the state, and so the census data, using that, we redraw our state legislative districts as well, our House and our Senate. And so they're done by two different processes.
Yeah, and when you say we, tell us who does that?
So the state legislature is responsible for drawing district lines. We think that's a conflict of interest, and in other countries, the state legislators have nothing to do with this process, but here, in Pennsylvania, the congressional districts are done as a bill. So the bill is given to the legislature, and then they pass it, and then the governor signs it. It should go through appropriate processes. We have some questions about the process that was done this last time. But that's how the congressional districts are done.
And if there's a disagreement, if they can't resolve it, it goes to our Pennsylvania Supreme Court, correct?
Right, that's right.
Okay.
And then the state, Senate, and House districts are done by a 5-person commission, and that is each legislative leader in each house chooses another party leader in that house. So you have 4 very, very, very partisan people, and then they're supposed to agree on a 5th person, and those 5 draw the lines for their own elections, their own Senate and House elections. Usually they don't agree on a 5th, and then the Supreme Court chooses the 5th person. But what you see is a real conflict of interest of people saying, oh, well, we want to favor this person because they vote the way we want them to. We want to punish that person because they keep trying to do what their constituents want them to, and that's really annoying. And so they use the redistricting process to control.
So you can kind of see where the conflict is.
It's a huge conflict.
Pretty clearly.
One other thing though, people say, well, this has been going on for a really long time, so why are you making a big deal about it right now? If you look at District 7, at one point it was just kind of a fairly compact thing, and over time it's gotten more and more and more convoluted. What's happened is mapping technology and data mining technology. You can take that information and predict really precisely how someone's going to vote, and so you can divide up districts very, very precisely to control how the election outcomes will be. So politicians really are choosing their voters using that data and mapping technology to draw the district lines to control our elections.
Okay. Well, what does Fair Districts PA want to do in terms of what do they see as a solution? So
the solution that Fair Districts PA is backing, and the League and a number of other organizations across the state, is an independent commission. There are 2 bills, House Bill 722 and Senate Bill 22, both of which have been introduced, have been well discussed, have not had hearings. The bills set up an independent commission that have individuals from across the political spectrum, including individuals who are not affiliated with one of the 2 major parties. It has transparency rules. It has who can be a member of the commission rules, such as we don't want lobbyists, we don't want wives or husbands of political leaders. We don't want party leaders who are not elected. Into the legislature. So a very
independent
commission, yeah. And I have to say, so House Bill 722 now has 102 co-sponsors, 33 Republicans, 69 Democrats. So we have support from both parties, and 102, that's now a majority of our legislators, has the most co-sponsors of any bill in the House this session. The committee chair is refusing to give it a hearing, but it has great support. And we have 16 co-sponsors in the Senate. So there is support for these bills. Getting them a hearing is very difficult because Pennsylvania's legislature is kind of locked down. It's hard to move things. The leadership keeps very tight control. You can find out all about this on our website, fairdistrictspa.com. We have maps, we have information about the bills, we've got ways to contact your legislator, because we've got people across the state who are doing really on-the-ground grassroots advocacy. That's kind of who we are and what we do. We've had over 350 public meetings in the last 15 months and had more than 18,000 people show up at those meetings.
Oh, you guys are really a force to be reckoned with.
We are teaching people how the system works. We want them to understand democracy matters, and if we don't engage, we will lose our ability to be represented. And people need to engage, and once they look at it, they say, yeah, this is important to us, and we want to be part of fixing this problem.
Well, let's quickly talk about the lawsuits that are pending, because that's going to really have a big impact. I was saying earlier, I was with an elected official who's running for Congress in 2018, and he tells me he's very confused about whether he's even going to be running or if he's going to be living in the district now. But so tell us about the current lawsuits and where we are.
So the League of Women Voters and 18 plaintiffs, one from each district, filed suits last June, alleging that the 2011 congressional maps are unconstitutional, that they are drawn in a partisan manner, and we used all sorts of data from political scientists that could really break out in a scientific manner why this was not acceptable. The Supreme Court took the case on an expedited manner because the 2018 elections are coming up, and they ruled last Monday, the 22nd, I believe was the date, that these were clearly, plainly, and palpably unconstitutional maps. And in that order, they required the legislature to draw new maps by February 9th, that those new maps had to go to the governor, and that he had until the February 15th to sign them. And then, the court would review them and make a decision one way or the other by February 19th. There's kind of a parallel process that the court also set up with their own expert, and allowed the respondents and petitioners in the case to file their own maps, to give examples of what we think or what they think are good maps. This has been appealed to the Supreme Court by the legislative respondents, asking for a stay, so asking for the ruling to be stopped until after the 2018 elections, for a couple of reasons. Their primary argument is that the court, in giving this order, took too much power, that the redistricting process is left to the legislature, that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is involving itself too much. We will see what happens. The petitioners have been asked to submit their response by February 4th, and then after that, hopefully we will have an answer from the Supreme Court.
How do you feel about them turning the 2018 elections upside down, or is that really not a concern? It's not your motive or mission? Or
let me say for myself, so we are voters, and our organization across the state, when they heard the Supreme Court decision, there was a great celebration from people in every party. I mean, I get calls from Republicans in Fayette County or Republicans in all across the state saying, just look at the map. My district looks like a mutant claw. I love to hear the descriptors people use of their districts, but people feel like their votes don't count. They're given their legislator. They have no choice, and everybody actually wants a choice, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. And to be honest, they're not going to start looking at candidates until well into the primaries, and we've got some time before that happens. So people are saying, we would love some choice. This is really exciting news. We'd love to see this shaken up a bit. Bring it on.
But I just really wonder how we move into a process for 2018 when petitions are around the corner. And now my understanding is with the congressional districts, they're not even going to release the petitions now, that they're going to extend that time.
They are working on timelines, all of that. I think that it's important that we're talking about two groups of people here, right? Three, if you're counting election directors in the Department of State. So one are the election directors in the Department of State, the people who are running elections, and they are saying we can do this, right? We can make our elections run smoothly. I think that had they not said that, the court would not have done what they did. The second group, what Carol was talking about, are the voters, right? And voters are going to be okay. Their polling places aren't going to change. The candidates who are running in their district may change, but you still have a responsibility to educate yourself about those candidates, even if it's somebody you've known forever, right? So this is an opportunity to plug into the political process, to learn more, to get more involved for voters. The third group is the group that's affected the most and are the most nervous, and those are the candidates. And it's certainly tough, right?
I think it's tougher for people who maybe it's an open seat and they're an initial candidate, you know, that they haven't been invested in the prior procedure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a process in place, and it's certainly confusing, and it's certainly difficult. It's important to know that congressional candidates don't have to live in their districts, so we're not requiring people to move to stay with the people that they have represented.
So it's doable, and it's a bigger part of the mission.
And let me say, too, about candidates. I mean, so incumbents are anxious, but those are their districts. They've been given their districts, and they've owned, I mean, people talk about it. That's his, I mean, there are people who've owned their districts for 20 years now. So for people, and we would have seen a surge of new candidates anyhow, because the Women's March issue, there's a lot of people just saying, we've let this go too far, and we need to reclaim our democracy. And so there would be new candidates in any case. Those people, for the most part, are delighted to see, so you're going to take that person's district and redraw it. I now have a chance where I did not have a chance. So there's a handful of incumbents who are unhappy, about 14 or 15, because some of them were going to retire anyhow, and there's a lot of people who are very, very happy.
Okay.
So I think
in
it
the
will
interest
work.
of time, because we only have a few minutes left, how about your final thoughts? Tell us, you know, what people can do. We've got about a minute left. What's next?
So I would say we really want to pass this constitutional amendment so we don't have lawsuits in the future, and so we fix all of our districts. This would address the congressional. We want our state house and state senate districts to be competitive as well. We have a petition on our website. We have lots of information, fairdistrictspa.com, and come join us. We have events posted on our website. There's an events page. As I said, we've had tons of events. We have events all across the state. And come learn more, because it's a really interesting topic and it's a way to engage.
Well, thank you both so much. Thank you for joining us. I hope you'll come back and do another show about where we are next. And I want to thank you and our viewers, and I want to remind the women of Pennsylvania that there's much more that unites us than divides us. Thank you.